Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, 3 High Liability Problems in the Safe Management of Outdoor Festivals, Fairs, and Special Events. Outdoor events, concerts, and fairs pose serious liability concerns for all parties. This program will provide plaintiff and defense attorneys with tools to identify potential liability issues and mitigate risk. Specifically, the presenters will cover the following: the planning problem, prediction and prevention, why this doesn't happen, how security companies increase liability, and finally, management crisis, the disconnect that may cost you or your clients millions. The presenters for today's program are Dale Yeager and Chuck Patten. Dale began his education as a criminal analyst in 1988. He has extensive training in criminal psychology, forensic psychology, sex crimes investigations, crime scene forensics, procedures, and domestic terrorism analysis. Dale received advanced training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center from 2005 to 2008. For the past 10 years, Dale has provided the security management training and security system redesign for the House of Blues, Live Nation Corporation, CBE Entertainment, and the Gaylord Hotel chain. Since 1995, Dale has trained over 100,000 local, state, and federal law enforcement officers in crowd control and security management at large-scale arenas and live events. His research on violence has been published in the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, Profiling Violent Crimes by Ronald Holmes, and Dale is a frequent expert with media outlets, including a feature appearance on an episode of the Forensic Files. Chuck Patten has over 40 years of experience in law enforcement and private security. He has served as a special agent in the U.S. Secret Service for the Cleveland, Ohio office, a detail and advance agent for 2 presidential campaigns, and establishing security plans and logistical support for campaign stops across the United States, a detail agent for Presidents Nixon and Ford, and a detail and advance agent for Jimmy Carter's presidential campaign. He was later selected as a permanent detail agent for the Presidential Protective Detail. After public service, Chuck served as National Director of Security for a Chicago-based Fortune 500 company with a portfolio of more than 700 properties in 35 metropolitan areas, comprising over 120 million square feet of office space. He later owned and managed 2 private security companies that provided armed and unarmed security officers for high-rise, commercial, residential properties, as well as event staff security for entertainment facilities. As an expert, Chuck specializes in evaluating traditional and event security force operational preparedness for both emergency response activities, including fire, life, safety incidents, and regular day-to-day activities. We will take one question and answer break at the conclusion of the program. If you have a question, please use the chat or Q&A feature found on the right-hand side of the screen to submit your questions. We encourage all attendees to submit questions throughout the presentation. Tomorrow morning, I will send out a link to the archived recording of this program, and we do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after the presentation is over. I now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm going to turn the presentation over to our distinguished guests, Dale Yeager and Chuck Patten. Dale, the program is now all yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this important topic. This is Dale Yeager, and you'll be hearing from Chuck in a moment. We want to talk about a very serious issue that both Chuck and I have observed and experienced in over 60 years of professional experience and professional work. And that's the issue of high liability related to outdoor festivals, fairs, special events, and concerts. And so we're going to talk today to both attorneys. If you're an attorney who represents or defends a concert promoter, or if you're an attorney, a plaintiff's attorney who has an action pending against an event, both of you will benefit from this information. So let's talk about the first issue. A well-managed event is a safe event. One of the things that I talk about constantly is management. You'll hear that word used a lot by both Chuck and I today, because it is poor management that creates accidents and crimes. Contrary to what the public believes, most things do not happen by accident or by chance. They're created by lazy, unprofessional people. And if that sounds harsh, I'll prove my point throughout this training. Management is the key. Proper management of clientele as well as the staff is what makes a safe event. And we're going to talk about the mismanagement and show you how things can be prevented always. I was a student of Dr. Drucker, Peter Drucker, for 15 years, and I learned a great deal from that man. He's brilliant. And those of you who don't know who Peter Drucker was, he created in the early part of the 20th century what all of us know today as management, business management structure. And one of the things he used to say was, management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right things. And it's critically important that people who are in charge of these events show leadership. And believe me, that's not biological. It is not something you fall into. It's something that someone teaches you. Leadership is something you learn from a mentor. And so one of the questions I'm going to ask constantly through this training is, how well are the people who are running these events, how well are they trained in leadership skills, not just management skills? The second thing that Dr. Drucker talked about, one of his most famous quotes was, you can only manage what you can measure. So whether you have pending litigation against an event or you are defending a concert promoter, the question is, what is the formal, not informal, but the formal process in place for constantly measuring deliverables, the goals, throughout an event, both before the event, during the event, and after the event, because you can only manage what you can measure. And so we'll talk more about this as we go through it. First issue, security companies increase liability. I didn't say they kind of do, or maybe they do. In my experience, and Chuck will agree, they almost always do. And there's some things you need to know about security companies, whether they're guard companies or otherwise. First of all, they work in a very small profit margin. In some cases, their profit margin is about the same as a grocery store. It's very small. So they're not going to go out on a limb to go above and beyond the call of duty in most cases. They're going to do just enough so that they get paid. And that's a problem. Number two is they routinely hire people with criminal backgrounds because of the background issue. So what's the background issue? First of all, when you hire a security guard company, and those of you who are attorneys who have pending litigation, this is a question. These are documents you need to ask for and receive. When you are hiring a security guard company, you need to ask if every one of those people, including their supervisors, have had federal criminal background checks. If you have lived in New Jersey your whole life, or lived in Kentucky your whole life, but lived for a year in Nevada, and all I do is check the state that you live in, I'm not going to have a complete picture of your potential criminal background. If you don't do all 50 states, you have not done a background check. Let me repeat that. If you haven't looked at all 50 states, you have not done a criminal background check. And by the way, companies who hire security guards, when you hire a security guard company, you need to say, prove it to me. Prove it in black and white that every single person, from a part-time to a full-time employee, the subcontractors that you put at my event, show me in writing a current 50-state federal criminal records check. Because if you don't have that, you don't know who's on site. And believe me, I've seen security guards cause more problems than patrons or customers. The next issue is most states have certification requirements for people who work as security guards. In my experience, and I think Chuck will agree with me, about 40% of the security guards that are on site at any event either have outdated certification or no certification at all. Again, if you're hiring a security guard company, say to them, prove it, or you don't get the contract and you don't get paid unless you prove in black and white that every single subcontractor, part-time or full-time employee has those documents and they are current. This is critically important. For those of you who are defense attorneys representing event management people, this is a huge liability bomb waiting to happen if you don't have your paperwork in order, because ultimately you're responsible for their actions on site. Number 3, have they been trained and tested? Well, what kind of training have these security guards gone through? If they say, well, a lot of them are ex-cops or military, most police officers and most military personnel do not receive security management training. That is special and that is unique. And so it's very important that you ask, what training have they received? And here's the question. You've got to prove it to me. Show me the test results for everybody you're going to put on my event. Where are the test results for each individual? I want to see them. I want to see the tests they were given, and I want to see the resumes of their trainers. I also want to see the curriculum that was used to train them. And we're not talking about the state certification training. We're talking about the company, the security guard company, its curriculum, its special internal training. Because again, if people are not trained on how to do security management, then they're going to be a liability at your event. And again, if you're an attorney who's representing someone against an event, these are questions that you need to be asking and documents that you need to get. So Chuck, do you want to add to this at all about the issue of security companies?
Yeah, thanks, Dale. You know, when I was a special agent with the U.S. Secret Service, I had to do a lot of advance work around the country in facilities that use private security. We would always run a background check on these security officers since they had access to the facility. And I was always surprised back then how many of these people had criminal records, as you mentioned. And secondly, that a majority of them were not even licensed with the state. When they go through a state certification, they have to submit to FBI checks. And a lot of them, because they had a record, did not get a license, and the company didn't bother to get it for them. So this is an issue that continues. I've probably done over 1,000 concerts, and of the ones I've consulted with, I find time and time again that people on site do not have proper certification. The backgrounds haven't been done. And as far as your training, you mentioned, most of the training, even if in a contract it says, well, these security officers have to have this much training, they count the training in the office and how to fill out the paperwork, you know, how to do things that affect their job with the company, and not any particular training and specific training to the property and to the events at which they're assigned. So it's very, you have to be very specific to make sure that people know what they're doing on your property at your event, that they've been trained to do that. And that's all I really have to say about that.
And another thing you'll see at the bottom of the slide, the guards receive training relevant only to protecting their employers, not you. And so if you're a defense attorney who represents an event planner, again, these what we call subcontracted or vendor security companies are looking to protect the people that pay them, which is not you. You're not the person who signs their check. And so again, they're only going to do things relevant to protecting themselves. One thing that Chuck has seen and I have seen is that many cases they're not even allowed as guards to fill out an incident report about an accident or crime. They have to tell the story to their supervisor. The supervisor fills out the form. Well, there's a reason for that, because they're playing games with the forms. I've seen forms written in front of me at events that didn't even reflect the incident that I just watched with the security supervisor. And so this kind of protection, this kind of illegal and unethical behavior occurs constantly, and so you have to be very, very careful. Ultimately, what we're saying is you have to vet these security guard companies extremely well, and then you have to have someone under your employ who's looking out for your interests and knows how to manage these security guard companies so that what you hire them to do, they will do. And this is critically, critically important. Management crisis, the disconnect that will cost you millions, literally. Planning for security and emergency management requires proper training and extensive experience. I love when people say to me, and Chuck, you've heard this too, where they said, you know, Dale, I've had 25 years experience doing live events. Well, most of you who are watching and listening to this webinar today know many people who have decades of experience being incompetent. Just because you've done something for a long time does not mean that you're good at it. And this is part of the problem. People equate time with quality, and that's just not the case in this world. And so just because someone has done that for a long period of time doesn't mean that they've done it well. And so one of the things that you have to ask is, well, what training have you received, and what experience do you have? And it better be extensive experience. And one of the things that is a myth that many people do not realize is that police officers, and I'm a federal law enforcement trainer, so is Chuck. We work for the Justice Department, the White House. And the thing is that most law enforcement do not have event management training and never have had it in their careers. Secret Service agents are unique because they do so many live events. They have that training, but that's very rare even among federal agents. And so most police officers have never had that training. And so it's important that you understand that both plaintiff and defense side as attorneys, that this is a fallacy. It's not supported by the evidence. You have a lot of people out there who are what we call JVs in the security world. They've never been in law enforcement, but maybe they've been in the military. Again, what's the extensive training that they've had in event management, and more importantly, what's their experience? And you need to vet those people before you hire them, or if you're a defense attorney who has or a plaintiff attorney who has an action against someone, you need to find out, well, what experience have they had and how effective were they? Every event they've had, has it had lawsuits? Has it had injuries? That goes on the record, and that's the record that you're looking for to make sure that you're getting someone competent. Are things going smoothly, or are there problems? And this is something we see constantly as legal experts, constantly. And so it's important that that you look at that and make sure that you understand that. Next is planning without assessment. What you don't know will hurt your event. So this is critical to both of you, no matter what side you're working from as an attorney. What you have to do is, first of all, you have to assess what the problems are. This is critically important. Long before the event takes place, you're going to have to assess what the problems are. The VIPs who are coming, what issues do they have? Believe me, they all have issues. What kind of medical issues are there? We just did 2 events, which I can't name, but we just did 2 events where we watched, and about 35% of the people who came to these events had mobility issues. They were either in wheelchairs, walkers, electric carts. In an emergency management situation, we had to plan for that. How do we get those people out? And so assessment is critical, so very critical. So one of the things I want to do right now is go through a basic outline for security, safety, and emergency management. And after I go through this, Chuck is going to comment professionally on these different aspects of what's in a basic outline. So step 1. How will you assess the threats at your event? People have issues and secrets. VIPs have complicated lives and generally more critics and enemies than regular people. One of the things you're going to have to deal with the VIPs, whether it's a local mayor or a U.S. senator or a celebrity, is that they have secrets. And those secrets can show up in an event and cause a problem. Mistresses, affairs, business partners who are upset, protesters who don't agree with their political stance. You have got to do your research, and you have to have someone experienced to do that, to find out what kind of issues do these people bring. I find that people who are local politicians and regional celebrities have more problems than national VIPs. They actually have more enemies per volume. And so critically important before the event takes place, long before, is to assess what the problem is with these VIPs and the people that are coming. Next is the area where you're going to have your event, the building, the tent, the auditorium, the outside stadium. Well, you're going to have to look at that area and ask yourself, is it prone to flooding? Are there construction issues on the highway that are going to cause traffic jams? Gangs. Every one of you, wherever you live, I guarantee you I can prove that there are two federally recognized gangs operating in your town and in your area. They're called straight edge and juggalos. You can go on Facebook, put in your local high school, put in straight edge or juggalos, and you will find many, many children, many teenagers especially, who are involved in those organizations. These are gangs. They've been responsible for numerous murders and felony assaults of law enforcement over the last 10 years. You also have street gangs like Bloods and Crips, and one of the things they love to do is to come to suburbia and as a way of putting a new member through their paces, have them go in and beat up someone at some kind of a nice, cushy event. Well, if you're having an event that involves VIPs, you have a situation that may attract those gangs. And so this is critically important. Chuck, do you want to add some things to this assessment of threats issue?
Yeah, I've been talking about this for a while to different people when they set up an event, is that one of the things the Secret Service, when we do advanced work, and we know we're going to drive to a certain place and we're going to be in a certain location, especially if it's an outdoor facility, we want to drive the routes and we want to do the assessment or at least be there at the time of day that the event's going to take place, so we can see what type of lighting influence we have if it's at night, what type of traffic problems we may have, things of that nature. And especially you want to inquire if it's an area where there's a lot of weather influence that comes along to make sure that you have, I think there's even applications you mentioned, Dale, in another talk we gave that you can monitor the weather. So you want to be able to, right, you know, you want to be able to make sure when you do these advanced work, do this advanced work, and you do these assessments of the facility that you understand what's in the neighborhood, what time of day, what type of light, what type of weather, what type of traffic problems you may have. That's something you have to look at to do your proper planning. And another issue is neighborhood noise, by the way, if it's an outdoor event. Sometimes the neighbors will complain and they'll come over and cause some problems. So that's one of the items I think is important when you're planning and setting up an event.
Very good. Next, step 2, planning for the coordination of police, fire, medical, and security. Now, I'm going to tell you something that many of you probably know, but if you don't know this, fire departments and police departments generally don't get along. In fact, on 9/11 in New York City, there was tactical control fighting going on between the fire department and the police department. And we don't like to talk about this, but it's a reality. And when you have an event and police are going to need to be there, they're going to need to be there for traffic control, depending on even for something like a wedding reception of a local celebrity or a VIP. It's very important that you hire local law enforcement to help you with traffic. And you're going to have to make sure also that you talk to the fire department to make sure that you have proper response from them, or better yet, have an ambulance on site in case there's a medical emergency. The 2 recent events that we worked on as a company had a situation where if we had not had ambulances on site, a woman would have died from a stroke and a young man would have died from a drug overdose. If they had to come any distance, they would have been goners, according to the EMTs. So it's important that you coordinate all of these things together, including the on-site security. This is critically important. And so let me go through some of these 12 areas that you must look at when you're planning an event. And again, small, medium, or large, these 12 areas are non-negotiable. They must be looked at. Number 1, a planning meeting with the chief of police, the fire chief, the vendor security, the on-site facilities person, the EMS, and the parking vendors. You're going to have meetings with these people, and you're going to have to get their input into putting together a plan of action for traffic management. What happens if there's an emergency evacuation? People are going to run to their cars and try to get out and create gridlock. You're going to have to deal with people with mobility issues. You're going to have to find out what the fire department needs, what the police department needs. You're going to have to explain to the vendor security what they're going to be doing, who's in charge, who actually makes the decision when it comes to emergency evacuation, who gives that command. that meeting is very, very important, and you're going to have someone who actually understands how to talk to those various entities. For example, the on-site facilities person that runs the building, runs the facility. They have to be intimately involved in this planning. So this is critically important, number one. Number two, traffic management plan. You're going to have a traffic management plan. Your VIPs are going to have to come in differently. Are people going to self-park? Or is there going to be valet parking? How are you going to control traffic flow so that people, when they're walking to or from their cars, don't get hit, don't get hurt? What happens when you have to evacuate people? To prevent those problems from happening, you're going to have to sit down and put together a traffic management plan. Number three, a security guard deployment plan. This is so critically important. You have to make a map, and you have to decide where these security guards are going to be. Where are the posts where they're going to stand a post? What will they do at those posts? What are their responsibilities? You're going to have roving patrols to be looking for problems. You're going to probably, depending on the size of the event, have to have someone in a vehicle driving around the area, the facility, to look out for other problems. You have to have 3 tiers. Just like when Chuck was in Secret Service, there are rings of protection around the president. And each group of people do different things. Next, the placement of ambulances and fire trucks. You've got to work that out, because if there's a traffic jam, the fire rescue people are not going to be able to get into your building. So you're going to have to work that out so that they can get in and out with people who need medical attention. Number 5, evacuation plan. Who has the authority to order an evacuation? How's that going to be done? And by the way, sometimes systems don't work. People assume that the PA system works. Well, in some new buildings, they don't work. You're going to have to test the communication for evacuation. Number 6, severe weather plan. Now, this is something Chuck brought up before. Someone has to check the weather every 15 minutes. There are apps for your iPhone, for BlackBerry, from the National Weather Service that will give you a 20-minute warning for severe weather. It actually gives you updated colored weather maps. And when I do event management with my team, I'm usually the weather guy that has to check that weather, and I have to be concerned about that. Lightning, thunder, flooding. Someone has to be checking weather every 15 minutes during an event. This is critically important. Fire emergency plan. You've got to work that out with your fire department. Crime response plan. How are you going to respond to crimes? Some crimes are minor misdemeanors, and you don't want to embarrass VIPs. You've got to handle all that. That takes some real organization, okay? Medical emergency plan. How are you going to deal with medical emergencies? Most of the people who are coming to your events, whether they're concerts or whether they're grand openings or parties, have medical issues. How are you going to deal with those different medical issues? Protester plan. Everybody loves to protest now. And one of the things we find at every single event that we're a part of managing is protesters. And you have to know how to handle them, because there are legal issues, there are constitutional issues. You don't want to rile them up, but you want to let them do their thing. How do you do that so that everyone is safe? Communication plan. It amazes me how many people just assume, well, everybody can talk to everyone. That's not the case, folks. Most radios do not communicate with other radios. In most of the events that we oversee, we have to rent digital radios so that everybody, fire, police, everyone can communicate together, all on one channel, because we find that most of these systems don't work. Well, if there's communication issues, that's a liability bomb waiting to happen. And if you're a plaintiff's attorney who has an action against an event, you need to be asking about their communication plan. Did they do a radio test? And that means going a quarter of a mile away from the facility to make sure it still works in case there's an emergency evacuation. This is critically important communication plan. Can everyone talk to each other? Do they know how to do it? Maps. With all planned locations of personnel, you've got to have accurate maps. Sometimes people have maps that are old or outdated, and you have to get current maps, and you've got to make sure your maps are accurate so everyone knows what their responsibility is and where they should be placed. And so those are the 12 issues that need to be dealt with, and I'm going to turn this over to Chuck for a few minutes to let him comment on any of those 12.
Yeah, I'd like to mention really quickly, as far as coordinating the fire department and the police department, especially if you're involved in planning, there should be some time in your pre-event planning. I believe that the fire department and police department should be involved in the site evaluation, because they may have some comments on how certain things are set up. It also gives them an idea where they may have to set up the ambulance, where they're going to set up if there's going to be some type of police facility where they're going to staff while they're there. It gives them some heads up and also lets them get a look at the grounds in case they have to call any type of emergency response team in. Secondly, I'd say that probably one of the biggest things that you mentioned, Dale, that always gets me when I do this, as far as from a plaintiff's point of view or a defendant's point of view, is the security officers, there's not a plan. They just don't know where these people were, where were they assigned, how many were assigned. There's just no map. There's really nothing they've written down, and that's really, really critical. Thirdly, I wanted to mention that I always think that all facilities should also provide a place for minor children to wait while they're being picked up by their parents, so they don't wander around. And parents drop their kids off at a concert or an event, and afterwards they try to pick them up. They don't know where they are. They're wandering through traffic. That presents a danger and a liability to the facility, I believe. There's also you talked about the order of an evacuation. I can't tell you how many facilities I've gone in as a consultant and found out that no one really knows who can pull the plug, who can turn the lights on, make an announcement, et cetera. They just don't. No one really knows that. So it really has to be established before the event. You mentioned about communication. I think you covered that, but I always find there are some structural limitations sometimes in facilities where you have a dark spot where the radios can't communicate. You have to know that. So if you're going to have some critical function in that area, you have to be able to figure out how to communicate to that area. Also, security and police, somehow if they're talking together, especially security, if it's really noisy in a dark environment, like at a concert, they have to be, if they can't hear each other in the noise, they have to at least carry a flashlight so they can signal. There has to be some way they can communicate with each other within all that turmoil. And I can tell you, 99% of these concerts I go to, and I'm not exaggerating that, no one has a flashlight. It's really disconcerting. Finally, let me say that in your security plan, if you're going to a site and they say, oh yeah, we have a security plan, we have it written up, you want to look at that and review it, because you might find that if it's not dated, or if it is dated, it might be 10 years, 15 years out of date. Right after 9/11, I did a lot of consulting in high-rise buildings, and I found that their emergency procedure manuals were sometimes 10 years out of date. So make sure it's up to date, phone numbers and contact points. And then finally, one of the things after the event is to make sure all these things that Dale talked about, all these planning, any notes, any reports, anything that happened during the event is, if it's been written down, it's been requested, there's some record of it, to put it somewhere that you can call on it a year or 2 years later. Some of the lawsuits that come our way, they're 2 years old or a year old, and they go on to discovery, and they don't have it. They can't find any information on anything, which makes it much more difficult. So, I would say if you're running or managing it, make sure that all that stuff ends up in a good place. So if you've done the proper job, at least people can go back and say, well, look, this is what we did, this is why we did it, and this is a record of what we've done.
Very good, Chuck. Good points. Then the other issue, which is also relevant to this, is who will quarterback your security and emergency plan? Many times, Chuck and I have found, most of the time, that nobody is in charge. And if someone is in charge, they're also in charge of 16 other things. You have to have a dedicated team of professional people, at least 2, that are overseeing all of the security and emergency management for an event. And that's all they should be doing during that event. Nothing else. Because someone has to quarterback. It amazes me how many times I have had to go in and actually do someone's job for them because the vendor security people, the supervisors, the executives were all stuffing their faces and drinking wine, and they weren't paying attention to the deployment plan that we had put together. You have to constantly have someone who is in charge, quarterbacking everything, putting the plans together, doing the meetings, putting all those pieces in place. Folks, bottom line is this. I have children. Chuck has children. Some of you have children. We send our children to these concerts, And one of the things that I just know, and I told my kids from day one, they're out of college now, but I told them, listen, you're in charge of your own safety because I don't believe or trust most of the places you go to have good security and good emergency management. So I teach them where to buy their tickets, where to sit, so that they're going to be safe in case there's an evacuation. They can get out and get home safely to me. The bottom line is that professional people have to act ethically, and they have to know their limitations, and they have to put these events together and put these plans in place and then manage those plans so that other people's children and moms and dads and grandparents are not injured or killed. I'm working on a case right now with Chuck, which is just a sad situation that left people maimed, left a woman dead, her 2 small boys are without a mom, all because of people's laziness and incompetency and not managing this event. And the thing is, we see it constantly. And I hear from concert promoters who literally will look me in the face and say, listen, stuff happens. You know, you can't plan for everything. Well, that's interesting because back in 2000, when the House of Blues, which is a publicly traded company, so I'm not speaking out of school here, I'm talking about something that is public information. At the time, 20% of their annual revenue was going to lawsuits. And they brought us in to fix that problem. Within 2 years, we went down to 0 lawsuits for 8 years, and we kept it at 0. So when people say you can't prevent everything, that's nonsense. That's unprofessional, uneducated people who don't know what they're talking about in this arena. Yes, you can prevent almost everything with proper assessment, proper planning, and proper management. And so, again, as we go into the question and answer stage, whether you are a defense attorney who is working with concert promoters or some type of a facility, hopefully you're hearing the message that we're trying to get across. And then if you're a plaintiff's attorney who has an action pending, hopefully we've given you some critical documents and critical information that you need to be asking for in your pending lawsuit. But the bottom line is we're very passionate about this because it's about people's safety in their lives. And no one should ever treat that without 100% effort in our professional view. So I guess I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt, and we'll take some questions now that people have.
Yes, and thank you, Dale and Chuck, for a great presentation. And to everyone who is in attendance, we are now opening up the program to questions. So please feel free to submit your questions via the chat or the Q&A section of your interface, which is found on the right-hand side of the screen. We've already had some questions come in, so we'll tackle those first. But please, we're going to take about the next 15 or 20 minutes to answer everyone's questions. Dale and Chuck, Kyle has a question about trip and fall concerns related to the setup of an event. He talks specifically about tents due to the location of posts and or tie-downs. But can you talk about what pre-planning should be done, whether it's an outdoor facility or an indoor facility, for setting up, I guess you would say, setting up tents and other areas, and what security concerns and also health and safety concerns should be considered when setting up an event for a program?
Chuck, do you want to take that initially? I guess Chuck's not there. Well, the bottom line is when it comes to tents, there are different types of tents. I've done events with cloth tents, with sailcloth. I've done them with mylar tents. It all depends on the structure of the tent. When you're having it put up by the rental place that provides the tent to you, one of the things you're going to have to do is make sure that you inspect their work. Don't assume that they are going to put it up correctly. Also, anytime you put a tent up, your local fire marshal is going to want to inspect, for exiting and things like that, ingress, egress. You're going to have to deal with your local fire department. But when it comes to trip and fall, that type of thing, you've got to have someone who has an eagle eye and has experience to walk around during the setup of the tent and then during the event to look at the tie down, to look at carpeting, to look at seams, anything that could create a fall hazard. You're going to have someone constantly walking around to make sure that those things are kept in place. Also, you're going to have ramps, you're going to have stairs in most of these tent setups, so you're going to have to properly deploy experienced security personnel at these ramps and stairs to prevent people from falling, to be there to be the accident prevention person. And so there's a lot involved with preventing slip and falls and accidents. You also want your security people in place to make sure that nobody is pretending to fall, to be a witness to the occasional people who like to do a fake accident so they can file a lawsuit. So you have to really be diligent and have some experienced people to do that. So.
Dale, I'm sorry, I was on mute there for a minute. I have a couple of
No problem. Did you want to say anything about the tent setup?
Yeah, I did. One of the things I did a series of outdoor events where they had some people trip and fall. They start to drink and they fall over these stakes and everything. One of the things we came up with was we would flag the stakes, put those little tie on that you do at the back of a heavy load. Also, sometimes they used this highlight paint that would glow in the dark, or it's a bright safety paint onto the stake areas. The other thing they would do is a step beyond that is to actually rope off these areas. It just depends if it's open to the general public, especially, and there's drinking and other things going on. They would just rope off those areas. Just take kind of a rope line right around the outer edge of where the stakes are. It does take up a little bit of space, but it's an extra layer of security. And then also I would talk about the lighting influence. You want to make sure you don't have, if you're going to have this, then you have to have some lights. If it's in a real dark area, no matter what you put up, people wander in, they could get hurt. It just depends on how big of a problem you might think about it, how much effort and money you want to put into protecting the area. And finally, I think what you mentioned already, if it's an area where you have a high concentration of tents and stakes and they're flagged and roped off, et cetera, and then you want to have a security officer or a security officer team of some sort monitoring that area to make sure people don't go beyond where they're supposed to go. And if they do fall, you say, well, we had this done, we had that done, and the guy wandered inside, he was peeking in the tent, and he fell over, et cetera. So those are just some of the quick things I can tell you that you may have to do to set up a protection against this.
Good points, Chuck. Matt, there's a question. I love this question from Chris. It actually came in early. The bouncy thing. What a nightmare. They're a lot of fun, but they're really an accident waiting to happen. And we've dealt with this issue at events where there were families. And one of the things that we have done, we've never worked on a case involving the bouncy, the kids bouncy things, but one of the things that we have done in setting up monitoring is to actually put someone inside the bouncy thing to make sure that the kids are behaving themselves and not pushing and shoving. We also find that adults go in there with their children and they have horrible balance and they end up hurting other children because they're much bigger and they don't have the balance skills. So my statement based on experience would be that you need to have, what we do is put someone inside there. It's a fun job. And their job is to be the referee and make sure that people are not doing things, children and adults are not doing things that would cause accidents. And in some cases, we just don't allow adults to go into them. We just let the kids go in. But they're a very big liability. As fun as they are, someone's going to get hurt. It's just inevitable. So hopefully that answers your question, Chris. We got another question here, Matt. Do you want me to answer the one from Thurman?
Sure, if you would, but please read it so everyone can know what the question is.
Okay. The question from Thurman is, how do you evaluate the amount of resources to devote to security? Is there a cost-benefit analysis that you consider? I'll answer that, and then I want Chuck to really talk about that question. When it comes to resources to devote to security, generally when people are putting events together, we find that is the last thing on the list, and they really want to do it as cheaply as possible. And I find it ironic that they won't spend $10,000 or $20,000 or more on security, but yet they can be sued for $250,000, $350,000, $400,000, and we constantly see, awards in those number ranges and even higher, and people are not willing to invest the money. I mean, that's just a lack of leadership. And I would also say that the cost-benefit analysis, what are you willing to spend to protect your profit margin? You know, I hate to sound cold, but I'm a CEO of a corporation, and let's talk business and money here. What are you willing to spend to protect your profit margin? Because if you get sued, and let's say it's a basic slip and fall, and you end up spending $50,000, for many people in a small to medium-sized event, that's your whole profit margin. So the cost-benefit analysis, Thurman, that I talk to my clients about, peer-to-peer, as one CEO to another, is, what percentage of possible lawsuit award are you willing to spend to prevent that from happening? And they start to understand the formula is pretty simple. So, Chuck, do you want to talk about that, what amount of resources to devote to security for an event?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. Many times I've been asked, well, what's the ratio? A lot of cities talk about it, how many police to how many citizens, et cetera. In a concert or an event, it's a little bit different. I don't think you can come up with a strict ratio. But let me tell you, one of the things I like to do, and I suggest everybody that does this in any type of event plan, is that you look at the area and you decide, if we had a full event with a bunch of raving and crazy people that were drinking, where would we put security? How would we deploy them? You spoke earlier about the security deployment plan. And we would build a security plan that would cover every single area. And then when you have an event, and say you're going to have an orchestra event, you don't need to have all those areas filled. You shrink it down within the plan you already have. Okay, we only need this many people. And when you have an event that's a hard rock event, dating myself, 9 Inch Nails, for instance, you're going to have an entirely different look and a different structure for your security, and it's all part of that deployment plan. So it's not easy. I don't think you can just say, well, you have to have 10,000 people where you have to have this many security officers. Certainly you need to have security officers to deal with the ingress and egress of those people. You have to have people in the traffic area handling all those cars. You have to have people deployed inside the facility. But in managing those people and the crowd safety and the crowd management, you don't need as many people if you had an orchestra event or a Kenny G event as if you had a 9 Inch Nails event. So that's something you, as if you're managing the event, you have to decide where are we going to deploy. And also you might think that in some of these events, well, you need people. One of the facilities I did inside, every time they had a bad event, the restrooms were trashed. So they finally decided they needed to put people and security in the restrooms. And then vendors also can hire police officers and security officers if they're selling alcohol or merchandise. Sometimes they hire people above what you would deploy as, say, you're trying to manage the event because they want some extra protection. So again, those people have to be trained and know what's going on, but you wouldn't probably foot the bill for that expense, not necessarily. So again, it's just not an easy answer to that question. You have to, I think, plan for the worst case scenario and then whittle it down from there as to what you really need.
Well, yeah. Here's the other thing too is it's critically important that you understand that there's a lot of bias that people have in event management that create a lot of these problems. And I'm going to give you an example. In my 22 years of experience doing this in big as well as large facilities, large arenas, I find that when you have a large amount of middle-aged or older women, you're going to have an incredible amount of violence. I've seen it at Barbra Streisand concerts, at Midler concerts. Just because you personally believe that that event is going to be low-key does not mean it's going to be low-key. You may not have the experience to make that determination. Many times I hear people, and Chuck, you've seen that, where people said, oh, this event's going to be a piece of cake tonight, and there's not going to be any problems, and then all of a sudden it blows up into a major situation. I was at a concert back in 2003 in Hollywood, California, where there was a family concert going on with this family, and it was all moms and dads and grandparents and children, and the security was very relaxed. They basically, the supervisors, the executives said, oh, this is an easy crowd. And I said, yeah, well, what are the variables? And they said, what do you mean? I said, what else could happen? Well, I'm going to tell you what happened. A major street gang from Los Angeles got their calendar messed up and thought there was a different band playing at this facility, and came that night and were angry because their band wasn't playing, and they started a fight which ended up into a major riot where the Sheriff's Department, LAPD, Hollywood PD had to show up. It was a nightmare, and people were injured, people were seriously injured. So you can never say, well, this group is kind of low-key. Always ask, and this is what professionals do, they ask, what else could happen? What are the variables that could occur? I've seen VIPs who have wedding receptions that end up in full-blown riots and fights because the ex shows up and she or he is angry about the wedding, and nobody factored that into their security plan. And so I think Chuck would agree with me that you always have to ask what the variable is, what else could happen, which I think is a critical thing. So, Matt, do we have any other questions?
We do. Chuck. We have a couple more questions for Dale and Chuck. Dale and Chuck, can you touch on the serving of alcohol and the best practices to both control it and also to prevent serving of minors at an event?
Chuck, this is more of your expertise than mine, so have at it, okay?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. A lot of the people who serve the alcohol are required to go through this TIPS training so they understand how to recognize people that may be intoxicated, et cetera. They also limit how many drinks can you buy at one time. Can you buy one or two? Probably the best way to do it is to wristband people. They have to go to a separate area. They have to have a wristband if they're 21 or older, whatever the drinking age is. And they can't be served without a wristband. And if you see, from a security point of view, if you see him pass a drink off to somebody that doesn't have a wristband, then you have to take that drink because that person's probably a minor. And then also you have to decide at what time during the event you're going to shut off alcohol sales. If you're going to have alcohol sales at all, assuming that we are going to have alcohol sales, that's what we're talking about. So what time are we going to do it? What time are we going to shut this down? Because if you go all the way to the end of the concert, there's some try to stay open after the concert, which causes problems. So what you want to do is close this down so people have a time where they're not drinking. So if someone gets in an accident later, you could say, well, we closed down to drinking a half an hour or an hour before, and we watched, we didn't serve, we had people trained, we didn't serve anybody that didn't have a wristband, we didn't serve anybody that looked to us to be intoxicated. These are the steps that we took to try to control this. I mean, some people, if you search people when they come in, they shouldn't have any alcohol on them. Occasionally this slips by, but I think having the people serving the alcohol trained properly, managing who gets served by wristbands or other identification, and limit the number of drinks that a person can get, and then and lastly, make sure you have a time set when you're going to shut down the concessions. I mean, that's kind of a broad outline, but I think it focuses in on the question.
Just the management of alcohol, Matt, it requires a single person at that event just making sure that you're in compliance with local, state, and federal law, or local and state law regarding alcohol, and that people are properly trained, and then there has to be people to manage the people who are dispersing the alcohol. Someone's got to watch them and make sure they're doing it correctly. Again, it comes back to management. I think Chuck would agree. It's management and oversight, critical issues. So
Yeah, I think that you always have to have some monitoring of those locations by security or police. There has to be some monitoring, because otherwise they're going to try to make money. They're going to sell to people who don't have the wristbands with the proper ID.
Correct. Matt, any other questions?
We have one final question, and I think it's kind of a broad question, but it gets at the heart of kind of everything that you covered. These events are often a collection of vendors. There are different vendors for each part of the event. How does the security team and the security planning team interact with those vendors to make sure that things are properly installed, that proper egress and ingress routes are planned? How should a security team and a security planner interact with the outside vendors who are multiple in numbers for each event? How should they interact?
Well, one of the things that we always do is we vet the vendors. So we just had a situation in New York where we had a concert which was promoted by a major manufacturer of alcohol, and there were many vendors out in the front area before you got into the concert hall. Well, we did criminal background checks, and we did background checks on all those vendors, and we treated them just as we would anybody else. They had whoever they were sending we had to have the documents on them, that they were properly, that there were proper background checks, and that's not something you need to do. That's something the vendor should be doing if they want to do business with you. We made sure that they came to the security meeting and they understood what the rules were. I've been at events where the vendors, the concert, the bands, the music acts agent, tour manager was dictating security rules to the security people of a venue. That is absolutely a recipe for disaster and absolutely inappropriate. You have to be in charge of your facility. And if you're an attorney who has an action pending, something you need to be asking is, well, who was in charge, and were they in charge of those vendors? Did they check those vendors out? Were they required to come to a pre-event meeting about security protocol? Because I've seen vendors cause a lot of problems. So in answer to the question, they need to be vetted, they need to be assessed, they need to be managed, and they need to know what they can and cannot do, because again, they're a variable that you can control with proper management. But Chuck, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, in addition to what you said, I think many of these vendors, of course, want cash payments. Another way to do it is on some of the, depending on how it's set up, is they have to buy tickets, and they have to buy the tickets with cash, and all the cash is in the central area. But also you need to have a standard booth set up. What are we going to do for lighting? Where are they going to be? And there's also usually a vendor area that's set up so you can set up patrols and security around that area. Many of the events have these vendor stations for merchandise so people can hit it on the way in and the way out, whereas alcohol are maybe spread around the facility a little bit differently. Also, you want to look at what they're selling, because let's say you have a booth, they're selling little knickknacks or et cetera that go along with it. And we just had a case in Florida, not a case, but a local kid smoked some of it. It was like it's this fake marijuana stuff, and he smoked it, fell in the lake, and drowned. And they're trying to do away with that. But again, maybe it's not illegal. But then again, do you want it at your facility? Because if something happens, they say, look, you were irresponsible for selling this. So make sure you know what they're selling. Make sure that for your facility. And it fits in with the event. In other words, you don't be selling something that doesn't fit in with the style of the event.
And by the way, Chuck would agree with me. Whoever's quarterbacking your security and emergency management needs to have people on their team walking around and looking at what the vendors are doing. Are they involved in criminal behavior? I've seen it. Chuck has seen it. So in answer to the question, it is a broad question, but again, they have to be treated as part of that whole management system, just like everybody else. So I guess any other questions, Matt?
No, I think that's it. So we're going to wrap up today's program. Dale and Chuck, do you have any concluding remarks?
Well, no matter what type of attorney you are, it is critically important if you're representing event management people or facility people as an attorney, ask some really probing questions. Professionals should never be afraid to be asked questions about their professionalism and about how they handle things. If you're an attorney who has an action pending against an event or a facility, you've got to ask questions with some expertise behind you so that they take you seriously and realize that you know all of their what should be in place, what should be what proper protocol is for event management. And ultimately, folks, this is about people who are taking responsibility for other people's lives, and that's a serious thing, and it has to be taken seriously. So, Chuck, do you have any concluding remarks?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, and you've talked about this, the ethical behavior of some of these promoters, and I always remember one of the very first facilities I did some work on. The person told me, he says, well, I was advised that it's better not to have a plan than to have a plan and not follow it, and that's why we have insurance. So that was his attitude, and of course, there are people that have that attitude, and that's when somebody's going to get in trouble. And regardless of they have a plan or not, they're expected a plan. When you go to a concert or to an event, you kind of have an assumption to take care of you, and there is a duty of care to those people. And I don't care who told you what, you better have a plan. You better have it managed and prepared by a professional. So you can say, look, we did the best we could. We hired the professionals. We want the people to be safe, because I will tell you that most people in many of the events that I go to and I've worked with, they just don't have a plan. They don't have a clue, and I guess they say that's why we have insurance. Yeah. So anyway, be safe, and thank you again for attending our webinar, and thank you, Matt, for coordinating all this. We appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Dale and Chuck, for the time that you put into the presentation. I think it showed. If you'd like to speak to Dale or Chuck about a case, you can contact us here at TASA. Our telephone number is 800-523-2319. We will be sending out a link to the archived recording of this webinar tomorrow morning, and in that email we will include a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that Dale and Chuck used during today's program. The archived recording will also be posted in our Knowledge Center. That's where all of the archived recordings of our previous webinars reside. To view our Knowledge Center, go to tasanet.com and click on the Knowledge Center tab that's located at the top of the page. If you have any follow-up questions or comments, we do take all the comments under advisement, and they help us to produce better programs. Please send me an email at mhyde@tasanet.com. You can just respond to the thank you email that you will receive at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time today. With that, I thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you at future TASA events. Thank you so much. I'm going to end today's program.
Thank you.
Thank you.